They destroyed the only bridge to my sister's island while she was battling cancer. They said it violated HOA rules, but I uncovered something much darker: bribes, secret land deals, and a plan to steal our homes. And when the FBI showed up at their door, I knew I wasn't crazy. I never thought a simple wooden bridge, just 25 feet long, would be the spark that ignited a war with the HOA. It started with a letter: bright yellow, loud in color, and even louder in tone. Unauthorized structure must be removed within 30 days. I remember standing in my garden, dirt still on my gloves, blinking at the words like they couldn't possibly mean what they said. But they did. They were talking about the bridge I had built last summer, the only way I could reach my sister Emily's home on the small island behind my property. Emily is battling stage 3 cancer. That bridge turned a 45-minute car trip around the lake into a quiet 3-minute walk across calm water. It wasn't just wood and nails, it was our connection, her lifeline. The HOA didn't care. The letter didn't come with a conversation or warning, just a demand. I called their office, but no one answered. Not a surprise. Karen Mitchell, the board president, only returned calls when it suited her. I decided I'd face her at the next HOA board meeting. Sleep didn't come easy that night. I lay awake imagining worst-case scenarios. What if they actually tore it down? How would I get Emily her medication? How would I help her if she had a medical emergency? The bridge wasn't just convenient, it was essential. The next morning, I arrived at the community center, heart pounding. 20 neighbors sat in rows of folding chairs, while the 5 HOA board members sat in front like royalty. Karen sat at the center, clipboard in hand, lips pursed like she'd already decided my fate. When I raised my hand to speak, she didn't even look up. "Next item," she announced. "Enforcement action for unapproved structures." "I'd like to discuss the violation concerning my bridge," I said, standing up. Her eyes narrowed. "Eleanor Reynolds, yes, we've documented your unpermitted construction. It violates 3 separate covenants." "But it's on my private property," I countered, "and it connects to my sister's island, which isn't even in HOA territory." Karen adjusted her glasses. "The shoreline falls under our purview." And just like that, I knew this wasn't about rules. This was about power, and they had no idea who they were up against. I thought maybe, just maybe, if I explained things clearly, the HOA would show some humanity. I was wrong. After the meeting, I filed an official appeal, complete with photos, property maps, and a written statement explaining Emily's condition. I outlined how the bridge wasn't visible from any community areas, how it was entirely on private land, and how it served a critical purpose. I begged them to consider the circumstances. But 3 days later, a new letter arrived. This one was even colder than the first. "Appeal denied. Structure must be removed within 72 hours. Daily fines of $150 will be imposed for non-compliance." No explanation, no reasoning, just a threat. I felt the blood drain from my face as I read it. Was this really happening? I rushed to the HOA office, only to be told Karen was unavailable and in a meeting. The receptionist wouldn't even look me in the eye. That afternoon, I found Karen Mitchell herself walking along the edge of my yard with a clipboard, snapping photos of my bridge like it was a crime scene. "Karen," I called out, "please, just talk to me." She didn't flinch. "You're in violation. I'm just documenting the issue." "My sister has cancer," I said, my voice shaking. "You know that. You sat through the board meeting. That bridge is how I get to her. It's not just a structure, it's a necessity." Karen turned, her expression unreadable behind those oversized sunglasses. "Personal issues don't exempt you from community standards. We all have to follow the same rules." I wanted to scream, but more than that, I felt something shift. This wasn't ignorance. This was willful cruelty, a performance of authority. And she wasn't acting alone. That night, I started getting strange texts from an unknown number. Selling would be easier. Why fight what's already decided? Then, a call from a representative at Pine Harbor Development. "We heard you're facing some property issues," he said, too casually. "We're interested in purchasing your land. You and your sister's place, too. We can make all this go away." I hung up, heart pounding. How did they get my number? How did they know about Emily? My hands shook as I dialed her. "Did anyone call you today?" "Yeah, some guy from a development firm," she said. "Offered to cover my medical bills if I sell." It hit me like a punch in the gut. This wasn't about a bridge. It never was. The fines, the sudden urgency, the denial of my appeal, it was all part of a plan. They were trying to squeeze us out, apply just enough pressure to make it unbearable. And if we couldn't be convinced, we'd be broken. I looked out the window that night, only to find my neighbor Derek Watson standing on his porch with a camera, pointing it at my property. When our eyes met, he didn't even pretend to be subtle. He smiled. This wasn't just a cold HOA. This was coordinated, strategic, ruthless. But they underestimated one thing: how far I'd go to protect my sister. I couldn't sleep that night. Every creak in the house felt like a threat, every gust of wind outside like someone watching. The HOA wasn't just playing hardball, they were playing dirty. But if they wanted a fight, they'd chosen the wrong person to push. At dawn, I was already out with my camera, documenting everything. Every angle of the bridge, every tree and shrub shielding it from public view. From the road, the bridge was invisible. From the community dock, nothing. I even paddled a kayak out into the lake to make sure. Not a single public-facing view offered a clear shot. According to the HOA bylaws, that made their violation notice completely baseless. But I wasn't stopping there. I dug into county records, zoning maps, and past HOA meeting minutes. Buried deep in an old PDF was something strange. A petition filed 3 months ago by Pine Harbor Development to redraw the shoreline boundaries. If approved, it would shift the jurisdiction lines just enough to make my bridge subject to county permits. Permits I'd never been told I needed. Permits they could now deny. It was a setup, carefully planned. And suddenly, I realized just how far they were willing to go. That afternoon, I drove to the county office. The clerk raised her eyebrows when I mentioned the petition. "We haven't received any public objections, so it's likely to pass," she said casually. "No one knew about it," I snapped. "That's the point." As I left the building, I noticed a familiar car parked across the street. Black SUV, tinted windows. It was the same vehicle that had followed me the night before. This was no longer paranoia. This was surveillance. Back home, I triple-locked every door and started compiling what I had. Photos, emails, recorded voicemails, a timeline of every violation and phone call. I even downloaded a voice recorder app and began documenting every conversation. I knew I couldn't do this alone. That's when Sophia called. "You need to come over, now. I've got something to show you." Inside her living room were 4 other neighbors, each with their own horror stories. One forced to remove a garden for non-compliant plants. Another fined for a paint color that had been pre-approved. And then James Wilson, a former HOA treasurer, slid a manila folder across the coffee table. "Financial records," he said, "and proof that they've been altering board meeting minutes to approve changes no one ever voted on." My hands trembled as I opened it. This wasn't just bullying. It was a racket. That night, I stood at the edge of my bridge, staring out across the lake, the documents clutched to my chest. I wasn't just defending a structure anymore. I was defending truth, family, home. And now, I wasn't alone. The line had been crossed, and I was ready to fight back. The more I pulled at the threads, the more everything began to unravel, and what I found beneath the surface changed everything. At first, I thought the HOA was just being petty, obsessed with rules, hostile toward independence, maybe trying to flex a little power. But as I sifted through the documents James Wilson had given me, I realized this wasn't a case of overreach. It was corruption. Deep, systemic, carefully hidden behind layers of HOA bylaws and property code enforcement, and the deeper I dug, the more disturbing it became. One night, I sat at my kitchen table, surrounded by paper, financial records, property tax statements, and public filings. James had flagged several payments that didn't add up. Tens of thousands of dollars paid to a landscaping company that, when I looked it up, didn't even have a working phone number. The name on the company registration? Karen Mitchell's sister. It wasn't just nepotism. It was fraud. A second company had billed nearly $200,000 in consulting services over the last 2 years. The address was a P.O. box. The owner? An alias connected to a man who sat on the HOA's advisory committee, a man who, incidentally, had also worked for Pine Harbor Development. I felt the blood drain from my face. This wasn't about a bridge. This wasn't even about Emily's Island anymore. It was about money, control, greed. They'd been manufacturing violations to pressure homeowners into selling. Once the properties were vacant, the HOA conveniently acquired them through back channels. Developers moved in, rezoned the land, and built new infrastructure under the guise of community enhancement projects. HOA funds, our funds, were paying for these improvements, which conveniently raised the value of surrounding homes, including the ones owned by the very people orchestrating it all. It was textbook laundering. And Emily's Island? That was the crown jewel. The final piece in their development puzzle. Without it, their grand resort project stalled indefinitely. That's why they destroyed the bridge. To isolate her. To weaken her. To force her hand. Suddenly, every strange interaction made sense. The cold phone calls, the aggressive offers, the silent car parked outside my home late at night. They weren't trying to enforce rules, they were trying to erase resistance. But they made one mistake. They underestimated me. I called Agent Torres at the FBI using the number he'd left on a generic-looking card weeks earlier, back when I'd first filed a complaint. I hadn't expected to hear back. At the time, it felt like shouting into a void. But this time, his voice was sharp, alert. "You've got documents?" he asked. "More than that," I replied. "I've got patterns, names, connections." "We've been watching this HOA for some time," he admitted, "but we didn't have what we needed to go inside. If what you have is real, this could crack it wide open." For the first time in weeks, I felt something unfamiliar. Hope. Later that night, sitting in the darkened living room with Emily on the phone, I read her everything I'd found. She was silent for a long time. "They're trying to take everything we love," she finally said, "but they're not going to win." And I knew she was right. This wasn't just a battle about a bridge anymore. It was about standing up against the abuse of power. About fighting for every neighbor who'd been silenced. For every family forced out. It was no longer their game. I had the evidence. And now, I had the FBI. The moment I handed the FBI those files, I knew the clock had started ticking. I'd struck a nerve, and they were going to hit back hard. The retaliation began subtly at first. A warning letter appeared taped to my front door. Violation, improper mailbox placement. The mailbox hadn't moved in 12 years. The next day I received another notice. Non-compliant exterior lighting. Then came the big one. A $750 fine for failure to comply with HOA infrastructure standards. I had no idea what that even meant. They were trying to bleed me dry. And it wasn't just me. Sophia called in tears after being cited for unauthorized gatherings when 3 moms stopped by for coffee. Marcus Johnson's property was flagged for excessive lawn ornamentation. He only had a bird bath. Even Mrs. Foster, who had been quiet since her husband passed, got hit with a violation for non-standard garden layout. Her garden hadn't changed in a decade. It was coordinated, targeted, and personal. Late one night, I spotted headlights outside my home. I peeked through the blinds and saw Derek Watson's SUV idling across the street, engine running, his face lit by the glow of his phone. He didn't look up. He didn't need to. I wasn't just being watched. I was being warned. Then came the break-in. I returned home to find my front door slightly ajar. Inside, drawers were pulled out, papers scattered across the floor. Nothing was stolen. Not my laptop, not my safe, not even my jewelry. Just my files. The copies I had made of the HOA documents were gone. Not all of them. Thankfully, I had backups. But it was enough to shake me to the core. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak in the house felt like a threat. Every shadow outside a potential intruder. I sat at the dining table, gripping my phone, knowing full well this was the price of resistance. Still, I refused to back down. The next morning, 3 construction trucks rumbled down my street and parked outside my house. Karen Mitchell stepped out of her silver car, clipboard in hand, followed by a man in a hard hat. "We're here to finish the removal of the unauthorized bridge," she said, her voice laced with false cheer. "You can't," I snapped. "There's an active appeal, and you know it." Karen raised an eyebrow. "The emergency board meeting last night denied your appeal. The notice was posted on the bulletin board." "Which no one checks at night," I shot back. "And proper protocol requires personal notice for impacted homeowners." Her smile faltered. "Rules are rules." "No," I said, stepping in front of the crew, heart pounding. "What you're doing is illegal." The foreman hesitated. "Mrs. Mitchell, if there's legal trouble, we shouldn't proceed." Karen turned on him, her voice sharp. "We proceed." But as the workers exchanged nervous glances, I knew something had shifted. The tension was no longer just mine to carry. My neighbors had started paying attention, watching, waiting. And this time, they wouldn't look away. The community center had never been this crowded. Folding chairs filled every inch of the room, neighbors standing shoulder to shoulder, their murmurs buzzing like a storm about to break. Word had spread fast. Something big was about to go down, and everyone wanted to see it. At the front, under the fluorescent lights, sat the HOA board, with Karen Mitchell center stage. Her signature clipboard clutched tightly in her hands like a shield. She scanned the room with a strained smile. "This emergency meeting has been called to address false allegations and misinformation that have recently circulated," she began, her voice sugary sweet but laced with an edge of steel. "The HOA operates with full transparency and within the scope of our governing documents." I rose from my seat in the third row, heart pounding, but voice steady. "Is that so?" I said, loud enough to cut through the room like a blade. "Then perhaps you'd like to explain these." Sophia and Marcus began distributing printed packets, copies of financial transactions, emails, property maps, and photographic evidence. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Karen's eyes darted to her husband, seated quietly at the back, then to Derek Watson, whose jaw visibly clenched. "Where did you get these?" Karen hissed, her smile now fully gone. "They're public records," I replied. Or, at least they were, before someone started doctoring files and redrawing property lines behind closed doors, before a bridge was destroyed to isolate a cancer patient from her only caregiver. Whispers exploded into full-on voices of protest. "You lied to us!" "My garden was never out of compliance." "You fined my mother for her ramp." Karen slammed her hand on the podium. "This is all fabricated. You're taking things out of context." "Context?" I asked, stepping forward. "How about this for context? A $487,000 landscaping contract paid to your brother-in-law's company. HOA funds funneled into shell corporations, intimidation, forged violations, illegal surveillance." Derek stood, pointing an accusing finger. "You think you're some kind of hero, stirring up the neighborhood? You don't know what you're messing with." "I know enough," I snapped. "I know about the forged removal orders, the fake signatures, the property theft hidden under the guise of community development. I know you were planning to take my sister's island and flip it for a resort." Someone shouted from the back. "That's why they tore down the bridge!" All eyes turned to Karen. Her facade cracked, visibly. Beads of sweat dotted her forehead. Her hand trembled ever so slightly as she adjusted her glasses. That's when the doors at the back burst open. 2 federal agents stepped into the room, badges held high. "Karen Mitchell, Derek Watson, step forward, please. We have questions regarding your involvement in ongoing investigations of fraud, conspiracy, and property extortion." Karen staggered back. "This is a setup. I've done nothing wrong." "You'll have a chance to explain," the lead agent said. "But you'll do it at our office. We have warrants." The room was dead silent, then erupted. Some people cheered, others just stood in stunned disbelief. The illusion of authority had shattered in real time, and everyone could feel it. As the agents led Karen and Derek out, I turned back to the crowd. This isn't just about me, or my sister. It's about every one of us who was silenced, fined, bullied, or ignored. That ends today. Applause thundered from the walls. The tide had turned, and the people who once ruled through fear were finally the ones looking over their shoulders. It started with a bridge, but it ended with a neighborhood reborn. The weeks that followed the explosive HOA meeting felt like waking up from a long, suffocating dream. With Karen and Derek in federal custody, and the rest of the board either resigning or under investigation, the control they once held over our lives vanished like smoke. But what remained wasn't just a void, it was an opportunity. An emergency election was held. This time, the ballots weren't pre-filled. This time, people actually voted. And for the first time in years, neighbors gathered not to complain about grass height or fence color, but to talk, to listen, and to build something new. Marcus Johnson, the man whose boat dock had been unfairly removed, was voted in as HOA president. Mrs. Foster, our quiet, elderly neighbor with the 12-year record of every HOA meeting, was elected as treasurer. Transparency was no longer a promise. It was policy. But the greatest change wasn't in the boardroom. It was in the people. We rebuilt the bridge to Emily's Island together. Not just me. Not just Emily. The whole neighborhood. Some brought wood, others brought paint. Kids helped carry nails and sandwiches, and retired veterans came with their toolboxes, saying they'd waited years for a real reason to use them. The sound of hammers and laughter rang out across the water as each plank was laid, not just to reconnect land, but to reconnect hearts. When Emily crossed that new bridge for the first time, the entire neighborhood stood on the shore, applauding through tears. Her smile said everything words could not. This was no longer about cancer, corruption, or courtrooms. It was about community. Real, unshakable community. The new HOA charter was signed on a picnic table with coffee and lemonade instead of clipboards and threats. Gone were the rule books weaponized against families. In their place were shared values: compassion, fairness, respect. We kept the best parts of what a neighborhood could be and finally let go of what it had become. One morning, as Emily and I sat watching children play near the rebuilt bridge, she turned to me and said, "They tried to tear us apart, and instead, they brought us all together." She was right. The worst of intentions had sparked the best in people. Now, each time someone walks across that bridge, they aren't just crossing water, they're walking into a future we built with unity, courage, and hope. A future where standing up isn't seen as troublemaking, but as leadership. Where neighbors protect each other instead of policing each other. Where healing doesn't just happen in hospitals, but on porches, gardens, and lakeside docks. The fight had taken everything out of us, but what it gave back was worth more than we could ever have imagined. We were no longer just homeowners, we were a family. In the end, this story wasn't just about a bridge or even about an HOA gone rogue. It was about the quiet strength that comes from standing your ground, especially when it's the harder thing to do. For those of us who've lived through decades of change, challenges, and hardship, there's something deeply familiar about this kind of battle. It's the reminder that even when the world feels like it's run by people louder, richer, or more powerful than you, integrity and persistence still matter, perhaps more now than ever. One of the greatest lessons here is that community is not created through control. It's nurtured through compassion. The rules that once kept neighbors apart were dismantled, not with force, but with unity. When good people speak up, when they link arms instead of turning away, even the most toxic systems can be transformed. It took courage, but it also took care. The kind of care that older generations know by heart, the kind that brings over soup when someone's sick, that fixes a fence without being asked, or walks across a bridge simply to say, "You're not alone." Another powerful message: don't underestimate your voice. Whether it's to protect a family member, challenge an unfair rule, or call out corruption, your voice can shake foundations. This story shows us that no matter our age or position, we are never too old to make a difference. In fact, our lived experience is often the exact strength a community needs when times get hard. And finally, perhaps the most beautiful truth. Sometimes the very thing others try to take from you becomes your greatest source of strength. They tried to erase a bridge, but instead they built a legacy. A legacy of neighbors who rediscovered what it means to truly live together, with empathy, fairness, and shared responsibility. To anyone listening, especially those who've been told to stay quiet, to back down, or to let it go, this story is your reminder that you still matter, that your choices ripple wider than you know, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is simply stand up and stay. Because some bridges, especially the ones built on love and truth, are worth protecting at any cost.